Welcome to SportsRundown.com. This week we're going to look at Penn State's trip to Ohio State. But first, we look at a recent game between these two.
Barkley. Nurnberger will send it away. Ohio State, Penn State, and we're underway from Columbus. Barkley from inside his own 5. Barkley with a lead. Barkley with a burst. Barkley down the sideline. Saquon Barkley runs the opening kick. 97 yards. Touchdown, Nittany Lions.
Okay, so number 8 Penn State travelled to number 2 Ohio in what is probably the biggest game left in the regular season. LSU have a pretty firm grip on number 1 spot. Their defence holds up in the next 2 games, Arkansas and Texas A&M. If the LSU defence holds strong, they'll almost certainly be the number 1 rank at the end of the season. Behind them, then you've got a toss-up between number 2 Ohio and number 3 Clemson. Clemson are third with 11-0, Ohio 10-0 at the moment. The difference with Ohio is they've got 2 pretty tough games left. So this one against number 8 Penn State and then away to number 13 Michigan. Clemson have a bye week this weekend and a pretty winnable game, the last game week of the season. If Ohio do win this, they go 11-0, they'd probably be pretty good money to stay second. If they win both the remaining games, they're definitely going to be second. Probably a little bit behind LSU in terms of the competition they've played. The schedule has been slightly on the easier side, but there's no comparison with the Clemson schedule, so they'll be number 2. So first, if we look at the Ohio State, this is a summary of each of their games so far this season. So the blue lines, the blue stacks are Ohio's points per game, or points in each game. The red is what they allowed, and then the 2 lines are just their PPG and PPG allowed. As you can see, there's a pretty clear high bar for the PPG. I mean, this team is pretty much the complete outfit. They score 51.5 points a game on average, and week to week they get very, very close to that number. A couple of exceptions, the Michigan State and Wisconsin games, but Michigan and Wisconsin are 2 very, very strong schools, and Ohio still managed 35 plus points in each of those games. On the other side of the ball, their allowed per game is very low. The opening game against Florida and the last week against Rutgers are the only ones to really significantly go above the average. That average is 9.8, so I mean less than 10 points per game is what this team gives up. There's a 0 in there. Cincinnati didn't score anything, and then some pretty good outfits there. Miami OH, Northwestern, Wisconsin didn't get close. So it's, everyone talks about this Ohio offense, but their defense is incredibly strong too. If we compare that to the Penn State chart, it's a very, very different story. So the Penn State PPG is pretty good. I think they score almost 40 points a game and they concede in the low teens, which would be, on the surface pretty impressive. But if you actually look at where these points came from and where they scored when they allowed, it's a bit more worrisome. The only 3 times they broke that average this season were the 3 of the first 4 games, Idaho, Buffalo, and Maryland. They got basically 80 points against Idaho, which is completely skewed the average. If we look at the latter half of the season, they haven't come close to really breaking that average since. Iowa and Michigan are 2 very strong schools. It's no wonder that the score comes down against those, but there's a very clear before and after mark there in terms of the points that this team has been putting up. Early in the season, there were some very low scores against Idaho, Maryland, Purdue. Barely made a ripple. Later on in the season, the more recent games, Michigan, Minnesota, Indiana, there seems to be quite a clear increase there in the points this team is allowing. So if you contrast that back to the Ohio chart, the points they score per game are broadly in line with the average week to week, and same story with the points allowed. Penn State, there's much stronger start to the season than we have at the moment, and it's probably a big part of why the spread is in around 17.5 points for this one. I mean, it's a very high spread to take against a team in the top 10 like Penn, and especially considering the start Penn State had the last time they visited Ohio. But it's very hard to see this team scoring more than low teens in this game. So based on that, what to wager? And make sure to check out on Twitter our hashtag #WhatToWager for all the latest and greatest. But in this one, the over-under line is 57.5. It's very high, and it seems to be based mostly on these 2 teams' ability and history of scoring high points so far this season. There's no doubt that Ohio will score high. They score high in every game, and they could potentially beat the over on their own. But the Penn State have a good defense. It's not as good as it was at the start of the season, and it probably isn't as good as it looks on paper, but it still functions quite well. The Ohio State defense is just phenomenal, and it's probably going to shut out Penn State mostly. So we're looking at a mid-30s, high-30s score for Ohio State and a comfortable win, but probably underneath that 57.5 over-under line. Penn State, they might get one touchdown. They're unlikely to get two. So if they're held to something in the mid-teens, it's quite difficult to see that overline being breached. We did see in the infographics, both of these teams, their game totals do tend to come down when they're playing against tougher opposition. Good game management, smart play. They manage the clock well. So the expectation is that this won't be a 55 to 36 game. It'll be much more at the bottom end of both teams' expected scoring. So 35-16. So what to wager? The underline under 57.5 points seems likely considering the defense that will be on display from both teams. Ohio probably have enough to beat this team minus 17.5. They've won every single game this season by at least 21 points, and they've played to opposition similar strength to Penn State. Home advantage will be huge, so mid to high 30s for Ohio, low teens for Penn. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Hopefully you found it informative, or at least interesting. And make sure to follow us on Twitter to keep up to date with all the latest news and what to wager articles that come out each and every day. Thank you.